Trigger warning, this video contains scientific information that some might find uncomfortable and unsettling. Sex is a polysemous word, and its meaning depends on context. For example, the word sex can refer to sexual intercourse or coitus. It can also be used as an euphemism for one's genitals. It can be used as a general term for the phenomenon of sexual reproduction, as in John Maynard Smith's book, The Evolution of Sex, or it can be used to indicate whether one's body is male or female. That is the meaning of sex we are going to discuss on this video. In the last century, our societies went through major changes in how we understand the concepts of sex, sexual expression, and sexuality. And we also begin to understand sex and gender as two separate things. Different theories of gender have been proposed by social scientists. And one of the consequences of that is that the meanings of the words sex, male, female, man, woman have become less clear, and that is causing a lot of confusion and controversy lately. Even though the majority of academia today understands sex and gender as two different things, they also acknowledge that they are closely related, even if that relationship isn't always very clear. In fact, whenever discussing these matters, whether with a lay person or an academic, it's often unclear what they mean when they say that someone's sex is male or female. A famous video from SciShow, which I have already responded to, loosely defines male and female as categories based on a combination of biological characteristics.
What we are talking about today is your biology, including your chromosomes, your hormones, your gonads, and your genitals. The catch is that these biological features don't always agree with each other. And they certainly don't always conform to those high school health class diagrams that tell us there's a single, universally correct pathway to being male and female.
SciShow's definitions are in line with how social sciences, especially the discipline of gender studies, and sometimes medical sciences too, understand the concepts of male and female. Another example of definitions of sex, male and female, are given by feminist historian Susan Stryker in her book Transgender History. The words male and female refer to sex. Sex refers to reproductive capacity or potential, whether an individual body produces one or the other of the two specialized cells, egg or sperm, necessary for our species to physically reproduce itself. Sperm producers are said to be of the male sex, and egg producers are said to be of the female sex. So here, Stryker is providing definitions of male and females as reproductive categories. But further, she writes, this should not be taken to mean that there are only two kinds of bodies, male and female, or that all bodies are either one or the other of only two possible kinds of bodies. Bodies that mix physical characteristics of male or female, of which there are many different varieties, are said to be intersex. None of this is incorrect, but it does lead to some definitional problems. Even though Stryker was careful to define sex as reproductive capacity or potential, she further describes males as sperm-producing and females as egg-producing. Now this works as a general definition, but it does lead to problem when it comes to infertile individuals, since they are neither egg or sperm-producing. Stryker also says that this definition assumes that there are only two kinds of bodies. And bodies that mix male and female characteristics are said to be intersex. Further, she also describes the term intersex. Typically, being an egg-producing body or a sperm-producing body carries with it a number of related physical traits. Egg-producing bodies tend to have a uterus, and they also tend to have milk-producing glands. Sperm-producing bodies tend to have a penis, which is useful for delivering the sperm to the uterus. Some genetic irregularities cause a body that is genetically male to look female at birth. Some bodies are born with genitals that look like a mixture of typically male and typically female shapes. Some genetically female bodies are born without vaginas, wombs, or ovaries. All of these variations on the most typical organization of human reproductive anatomy, along with many more, are called intersex conditions. These This is also correct, but just like Hank Green from SciShow, it seemed that Stryker is defining male and female as a combination of sex characteristics. Even though at the same time, she also defined male and female as reproductive categories based on one's capacity or potential to produce either eggs or sperm, which leads to a lack of clarity in her definitions of male and female. The main reason for this confusion is because Green, Stryker, and others who discuss this topic on a sociological or medical context only have human beings in mind. This is a problem that evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins raised in his classic book The Selfish Gene. We as mammals see the sexes defined as a syndrome of characteristics: possession of a penis, bearing of the young, suckling by means of a special milk glands, certain chromosomal features, and so on. These criteria for judging sex are very well for mammals, but for animals and plants generally, they are no more reliable than is the tendency to wear trousers as a criterion for judging human sex. In frogs, for instance, neither sex has a penis. Perhaps then, the words male and female have no general meaning. They are, after all, only words, and if we do not find them helpful for describing frogs, we are quite at liberty to abandon them. We could arbitrarily divide frogs into sex 1 and sex 2 if we wished. However, there is one fundamental feature of the sexes which can be used to label males and females throughout animals and plants. That is that the sex cells or gametes of males are much smaller and more numerous than the gametes of females. That is true whether we are dealing with animals or plants. One group of individuals has large sex cells, and it is convenient to use the word females for them. The other group, which it is convenient to call male, has small sex cells. And as we shall see, it is possible to interpret all the other differences between the sexes stemming from this one basic difference. At first, this might seem simply like a longer version of that basic definition given by Stryker, but Dawkins' description gives us a great insight why any definition of male and female that refers to a combination of sex characteristics is not useful in biology. It is a bad definition. They are useful when referring to organisms that share similar physical characteristics. But when referring to organisms with vastly different phenotypes like humans and frogs, human physical characteristics are as useful to determine the sex of frogs as it is the tendency of a human to wear trousers or skirts. But Dawkins' descriptions are still a little bit problematic. The reason why I say so is because it might lead some to think that what determines the sex of an organism is the kind of sex cell it actively produces or has the full potential to produce. Which again might lead some to conclude that infertile individuals are neither male or female. But before we can solve this definitional challenge, it is important that we get familiar with a few important concepts. At no point in the excerpt I quoted from Dawkins he refers to sperm or eggs. In fact, he mentions small and large sex cells, because this is what the words sperm and egg actually refer to: sex cell size. It doesn't matter how big the sex cells are or the relative difference between them. Whenever a species reproduces via a combination of sex cells that are different in size, which is called anisogamy, it is determined that the large cells are called egg and the small cells are called sperm. As the Encyclopedia of Evolutionary Psychological Science describes, female gametes are larger than male gametes. That is not an empirical observation, but a definition. In a system with two markedly different gamete size, we define females to be the sex that produces the larger gametes, and vice versa for males. So it's very clear, male and females are two reproductive categories based on measurable difference in gamete size. Whenever a species reproduces via anisogamy, it is determined by convenience that the female will be the one that produces the large sex cell, and the male will be the one that produces the small sex cell. And the reason why we do so is because, as I have explained in my video response to SciShow, scientific classifications and categories, they need to be precise and practical. They have to facilitate communication between scientists. They have to be meaningful and leave little or preferably no room at all for ambiguity. Now, anisogamy describes the basic definition between egg and sperm. sperm. But as Doxing puts it in his book, it is possible to interpret all differences between males and females stemming from this one basic difference in gamete size. And the reason is quite simple. Being different in size and number, sperm and eggs will require different anatomical structures and physiology in order to be produced by an organism's body. So a male body, in order to produce sperm cells, will use energy differently than a female body will use to produce egg cells. And this is true to animals and plants. Another result of this difference in gamete size is what we call sexual dimorphism, which is defined as the visible differences between male and female bodies. The simplest explanation for the evolution of sexual dimorphism is that it increases the chances of a male or a female to find a mate to reproduce. And even though sex characteristics vary greatly between different species, human and peacocks are quite different from each other, the explanation for the evolution of sex characteristics is the same. And that explains why it's possible to classify an organism as male or female even when the organism is infertile. Because eggs and sperm require different structures to be produced. Another issue that is causing a little bit of confusion in people regarding the definition of male and femaleness is the process of sex determination, because that is indeed a very complicated process. Now, we are used to understand sex determination according to the XY sex determination system because, well, it is the system that we use to determine sex in humans. But there are other systems of sex determination in nature, which might make it easier for us to understand why fertility is irrelevant when it comes to determine whether an organism is male or female. Let's look at the example of haplodiploidy, which is a much more straightforward system of sex determination. Haplodiploidy is the system used to describe sex determination in many insects, including social insects like honeybees. In this system, male or femaleness is determined by the fertilization or non-fertilization of the egg laid by the female, usually the queen of the colony. When a queen honeybee lays her eggs, some of them are fertilized by sperm cells, which she keeps inside a sperm bank in her body called spermatheca, and some remain unfertilized. The ones that are not fertilized are haploid. That means that they only receive one set of chromosomes coming from one donor, their mother, the queen that laid the egg. And these individuals are always male. However, the laid eggs that are fertilized are diploid. That means they receive two sets of chromosomes, one coming from their mother, the queen, and the other coming from their father. And these individuals are always female. Now, worker bees are typically infertile and they don't lay eggs. But genetically, they are identical to queen bees. In fact, what causes a female honeybee to develop as a worker or a queen is solely the kind of food that she receives in her larval form. Again, genetically, they are the same. This example of haplodiploidy is extremely useful to explain why fertility plays absolutely no role in determining an organism's sex. Queens and workers go through the same process of sex determination, but only queens are typically fertile. And even though sex determination is much more complex in the XY sex determination system, the moment when the sex of a human being is determined is exactly the same moment when the sex of a honeybee is determined, at the time of conception. The general rule is very simple and pretty much all of us know it. If the egg of a female human is fertilized by a sperm cell containing a Y chromosome, the organism is male. And this is the case independently of how many copies of X or Y chromosomes the two sex cells carry. This is another common point of confusion. Thank you very much, Fausto Sterling. Now, we are used to define human females as XX and human males as XY, but that's not quite correct. The page about Klinefelter syndrome on the NHS website gives a very good explanation. Usually, a female baby has two X chromosomes and a male has one X and one Y. But in Klinefelter syndrome, a boy is born with an extra copy of the X chromosome. The X chromosome is not a female chromosome and is present in everyone. The presence of a Y chromosome denotes male sex. Boys and men with Klinefelter syndrome are still genetically male. So it's not the number of Y chromosomes that denotes male sex, but its very presence. And the reason for that is because the genes that determine male sex development are located in the Y chromosome, the gene SRY being the most important for triggering male development. Therefore, with a couple of very rare exceptions like De La Chapelle syndrome and Swyer syndrome, a person with a Y chromosome is male because the presence of this chromosome will lead to the development of an anatomy and physiology that supports the production of sperm cells. So it is the production of sperm cells itself that denotes maleness, but the fact that one's anatomy and physiology will develop to support the production of small sex cells following the instructions of their genes. A male reproductive system is incapable of producing egg cells under any natural circumstances. And this system for classifying males and females works independently on whether the sex-determining system is XY, ZW, or haplodiploidy, or whether the sperm cells are generated by a pair of testes or by a stamen, which is the sperm-producing organ in plants. That's because these structures have evolved in different species to support the production of one gamete or the other. To quote Dawkins one more time, it is possible to interpret all differences between male and females stemming from this one basic difference in gamete size. And this is how we get to the following definition of male and female. A male will be described as an organism with a reproductive anatomy and physiology organized around the production of small sex cells, or sperm. And female will be described as an organism with a reproductive anatomy and physiology organized around the production of large sex cells, or eggs. These definitions don't mention reproductive capacity or sex characteristics, and they still center the classification on gamete size, which is used as a general guide for the classification. Now I know that some of you are yelling at me right now and saying that I'm ignoring intersex bias. I am not. So let's talk about that. Even though most cases of what is referred to as intersex are unambiguously male or female, there are some rare cases of ambiguity. Since we established that male and female are reproductive categories based on whether an organism's anatomy and physiology is organized around the production of either eggs or sperm, it does pose a problem to the classification when an organism's reproductive anatomy and physiology is ambiguous. Just remember, the issue here is not fertility. We have already established that male and femaleness are independent of fertility. The issue here is that when there is ambiguity, how are we going to determine whether one's reproductive anatomy or physiology is organized around the production of egg or sperm? Now, eggs and sperm are produced by a type of organ called gonads. That's why they are referred to as the primary reproductive organ. In animals, we call the gonads with the capacity to produce sperm testes. In plants, they are called stamen, as you've seen before. And the gonads that have the capacity for producing egg cells are called ovaries. That's for both animals and plants. So if a person's gonads are testes, we say that they are male, even if the secondary reproductive structures are typically female. Because remember, male and femaleness are defined according to whether one's anatomy and physiology is organized around the production of either sperm or eggs. Production is the key word here. And under all natural circumstances, testes can only produce sperm cells and ovaries can only produce egg cells. However, in some cases, an individual's gonads don't develop as either testes or ovaries. We call them ovotestes or streak gonads. In humans, these cases are estimated to be around 0.02% of live births, and they also happen in other species too. Recently, a shark with ovotestes was found near the coast of Taiwan. But despite being exceedingly rare, these cases do present a challenge to the classification of male and female. In the past, we used to refer to these individuals as hermaphrodites. However, they are not hermaphrodites, since in biology, hermaphroditism is defined as an organism having the reproductive anatomy and physiology organized around the production of both sperm and eggs. And this is not the case here, since streaked gonads are underdeveloped gonads. They are not discernible as either testes or ovaries. By the way, intersex people in this situation usually feel very insulted to be referred to as hermaphrodites, so please don't do that. But anyway, since streaked gonads are neither ovaries or testes, can we classify these individuals as male or female? Well, nowadays, we actually can. With a DNA test, it's possible to determine why an individual's gonads has remained underdeveloped. And this determination allows us to predict whether an individual's streaked gonads under normal circumstances would develop as either testes or ovaries. So technically speaking, these individuals are infertile male and females with underdeveloped reproductive organs. And one more time to remember, infertility doesn't matter when it comes to classifying sex. But here comes an important question. Do we always, under all circumstances, have to make a determination? Well, I don't think so. A big concern of intersex individuals is to have their bodies altered through surgeries to fix their reproductive organs that sometimes don't need any fixing. Intersex people deserve to have autonomy over their bodies, and surgeries without consent should only be performed when it is a medical necessity. Also, some intersex individuals, but not all of them, feel that the sexual ambiguity of their bodies make them neither male or female, while others feel that they are of the opposite sex from the sex that they will be technically classified as. This is typical among individuals with androgenic sensitivity syndrome, for example, who despite having typically female phenotypes, being identified as girls at birth, are technically male because they have unambiguous male gonads. So when a woman is diagnosed with androgenic sensitivity syndrome, shouldn't her birth certificate be changed to male in order to be scientifically accurate? Well, of course not. They are usually happy living as women, so why would you do that? And this is an extremely important issue that I want to address before I finish the video. As I've said in the beginning of the video, the word sex has different meanings in different contexts. The definitions we went through in this video are definitions used in biological sciences, because biology is the study of all forms of life. And as we've seen in this video, human sex characteristics are generally useless to classify sex in other species. In biology, we cannot use humans as parameter for any taxonomy, because that would be to place humans deserving of a special place in our understanding of natural phenomena. And that is more akin to religion rather than science. We cannot do that. A fundamental point of the theory of evolution by natural selection is that humans are just apes in a succession of ape species with no special place in the tree of life. But in other contexts, outside of biological sciences such as legal, political, social, and to some extent medical, the word sex, male and female can have alternative meanings. And that is why I think it's so important to make very clear what is the parameter that you are using when you are talking about sex and male and female. When a person uses the expression biological sex, they are referring to the definition of sex that we went through in this video, which is the definition used in biology. Doesn't mean that we have to classify sex like that in every single circumstance. Sometimes someone's biological sex and someone's legal sex, that is the sex that they have in their birth certificate and identification documents, is not the same. And that's okay. And I think we must stop being so inflexible on the idea that they must always be the same. And both extreme sides on this gender and sex debate are fixated on that idea that they always must be the same in every circumstance. And that doesn't serve anybody and is only causing stress and confusion, especially on Twitter. It's crazy. It's making people angry, miserable, and just fight and hate each other constantly. It's making cis people, trans people, intersex people, non-binary people harass each other, discriminate against each other, sometimes even dox each other because of this. It has even made people go as far as trying to ruin the careers of scientists and professors. This has to stop. Thanks for watching, guys. As always, a big thank you to my subscribers and a massive ultra thank you to my patrons. Your support means a lot to me. Thank you so much. And I've been Michel, and I'll see you next time.